Musical texture is one of the most interesting things to listen for, I think. One way to think about texture is to determine how many layers are going on in a piece. For example, if you hear one melody and that's it, or if you hear one melody and there are some chords that support it, or maybe there's more than one melody at the same time. Wright's definition of texture is that it's the density and disposition of the musical lines. Here are three types that we're going to be listening to. There's actually 4 types, but these are the 3 that I'd like you to know. Just looking at the stem of the words will help you. Mono means one sounding, meaning that there would be one melody. Homo means same. So with homophony, what that means is that you would have one melody with some kind of accompaniment. And then polyphony is the most complex out of the 3. This is when you have many sounds, or at least 2 or more melodies. I like these pictures, these little graphs, to show you the 3 types of texture. The first one is this purple squiggly line, and what that represents is a melody. So that would be an example of a monophonic texture. It could be you singing in the shower. It could be you take out your flute and start playing a melody, or any melodic instrument, and that would be it. It could also be a group of you gathered around a birthday cake singing happy birthday. So it doesn't necessarily mean that only one person is creating it, but it means that there's only one strand to the texture. Imagine the beginning of the Ode to Joy excerpt, which is just the basses and cellos playing the opening theme. This one in the middle would be the picture for polyphony, excuse me, or a polyphonic texture. You have 3 different little symbols here that represent melodies that aren't the melodies that are different from each other. A purple squiggly line, this little gray line, and then this jagged orange line. This is one way of envisioning polyphony. This third symbol is an example of homophony. The purple line would represent the melody, and then these, do you have any idea what these little dashes mean underneath? If you're thinking that they mean chords, then you're thinking right. So if you look at the difference between this first picture and this picture, notice that this would have some kind of an accompaniment, some kind of added harmony. So that's the difference between a monophonic texture and a homophonic texture. This next slide, I really like this because it shows the difference between how you can create a monophonic texture with one person versus how you can create a monophonic texture with a group. So here's our first example. My computer's thinking. There we go. I hope you recognize the instrument. That was on the listening exercise number 8. That was not the violin, but the cello. And that was a good example of a monophonic texture, a single line melody. This example is created by a group of performers all singing the same thing at the same time. Just the same as if you were, of course this is a religious piece, but if you were standing around a birthday cake singing happy birthday, same notes at the same time, even if it's a group, you're creating monophony as well. A polyphonic texture requires 2 or more independent melodies, and what's meant by independent is that they're of equal interest. This picture here shows 2 different looking symbols, so notice that they're not related in this example. To create polyphony, you need at least 2 different melodies at the same time. This is a piece by Bach. Notice that one part is moving twice as fast as the slower moving part. notice that the lines compete for your attention. That is an example of a polyphonic texture that is based on two unrelated ideas. You'll see this word on the screen. It says counterpoint. This is how Wright defines counterpoint. He says it's the harmonious opposition of two or more independent musical lines. I think that it might be easier for you to just think about that counterpoint is pretty synonymous with polyphony. And basically, if you take a class in counterpoint, what you learn is how to combine multiple melodies at the same time. Counterpoint is the art of polyphony. What you just heard was an example of something called free counterpoint, because the melodies weren't related. Perhaps a more common way of creating counterpoint or polyphony is through the use of something called imitation. Actually, you all know what imitation is. Imitation is something sort of like an echo effect. So here's an example of a polyphonic texture that's created by the use of imitation. This is a really good example, a piece by a French composer named Josquin des Prez that you'll see a little bit later in the semester. And this is a vocal piece written for the Virgin Mary. And you notice that each of the four parts keeps coming in, and it creates this overlapping effect. This overlapping effect is basically what imitation is. Starts in the sopranos and it works its way down. Notice every time the new vocal part comes in, they sing the same motive. There's that leap of a fourth and then the repeated tone using the same words, so it's pretty easy to hear it. Okay, so that's also polyphony, and in this case this is polyphony that's achieved through the use of imitation. So I usually ask my face-to-face classes, since they're all singing the same thing, using the same words, why is this not an example of monophony? Well, the answer to that is that because of the staggered entrances, harmony is created. So when the alto comes in, for example, with the C, the soprano is already on some different pitches. That creates harmony. And also the composite effect when you're listening to the music is that you've got multiple melodies that are independent. Okay, so there's two ways of producing polyphony. One is through what's called free counterpoint, where you combine two or more ideas simultaneously. In my face-to-face classes, I like to have the class choose two different songs and sing them at the same time. So it's an interesting kind of effect that you get. And here's a picture of a free counterpoint. In this case, there's three examples. But when you have so much going on, it can sometimes sound a little bit challenging. If you're a composer like Bach and you think about it, you can make the different melodies sound really nice, but you have to take the harmonies that result into consideration. This piece is a 20th century piece by Stravinsky. So as it's pointed out here, free counterpoint can usually be the most challenging texture to hear. This slide might look a little bit funny, but actually homophonic texture is the most common out of the three textures, at least in popular music. Let me explain homophony. The stem of the word homo has to do with sameness. So if you keep that in mind, one way to think about a homophonic texture, as you see here below, is a series of changing chords. These dashes would be chords. Okay, so this is a series of chords here, and I'll play it in just a second. Where's the melody? You remember the Wright lecture where he asks where the melody is usually placed, up high or down low? and he played a little piece of Mozart's, and it sounded much better up high. Usually, it's not always the case, but usually the soprano part would have the melody. So if you keep in mind the definition of melody is a series of pitches moving through time, then that purple squiggly line is formed out of the top note or the melody in the sopranos. Okay, so that's one melody, and the other voices underneath it are changing roughly at the same time to provide the accompaniment. That's a really good example of a homophonic texture. Another good example of a homophonic texture would be to take out your guitar and start strumming some chords and maybe singing a melody with that, or sitting down at the piano and playing chords with the left hand and playing a melody in the right hand. Or maybe you're in a rock band and you're singing a solo, and then the rest of the band would be the dashes here that are providing the accompaniment. The thing with homophonic texture is that there is harmony going on, but the harmony that's going on does not compete with the melody. And that's the difference. Let me give you one last example. Let's take the song Row, Row, Row Your Boat. Sing it by yourself. That would be what kind of texture? It would be a monophonic texture because it's a single line. Okay, take Row, Row, Row Your Boat and sing it as a round. Well, you can't do that by yourself, but with a group or at least one other person, and you create that imitative effect. So that would be polyphony. Okay, let's say you sing Row, Row, Row Your Boat and you have a friend sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star at the same time. That would produce what kind of texture? Polyphonic texture, because you have two different things at the same time. That would produce free counterpoint. And lastly, take Row, Row, Row Your Boat and imagine that I'm playing chords on the piano to accompany you. That would be homophonic texture. Okay, I hope this helped.